Welcome to the Criminal Imagination. Today I let my voice begin in a hush, like someone lifting the lid of a long locked trunk, because when we speak of siblings in crime fiction, we are really speaking of mirrors. Mirrors that are kind or cruel or cracked. Mirrors that reflect us back as monsters we fear or monsters we secretly want to be. Today I am opening a conversation that has haunted me for years. Who do we become in the mirror of the family? And to explore that question, I'm turning to three unsettling, brilliant books. Brit Bennett's The Vanishing Half, where identity is a twin split down the middle. Iain Banks's The Wasp Factory, a fever dream of sibling absence and twisted self creation. William March's The Bad Seed, an unnerving portrait of mothers and daughters locked in a genetic riddle. Each of these novels, in its own way, is a study in twinning, rivalry, inheritance, and the Jungian shadow, those parts of ourselves we refuse to claim. So we hand them knowingly or not to the children who follow us. And since my channel is filled with readers who can sniff out a lie the way detectives sniff out gasoline on a burnt carpet, I'll speak plainly. Crime fiction has always understood that family is the first crime scene. When I read these stories, I feel as if the authors are holding up three different mirrors, each angled towards the same central truth. Identity is not formed in solitude. It is sculpted against the bodies, faces, and shadows of those closest to us. In The Vanishing Half, Stella and Desiree Vignes grow up so entangled that their very bones seem to echo each other until one decides to vanish into whiteness, splitting the mirror in two. In The Wasp Factory, Frank Goodham builds his entire identity around the ghost of a brother who isn't there. His whole violent mythology a cry into an empty mirror. And in The Bad Seed, Christine Penmark looks at her daughter and sees a reflection that should not exist. A child who is not a mirror of her nurturing, but of something buried deeper, darker, genetic. Three books, three crimes, not of murder, though they have plenty of that, but identity theft by blood. Let me take a moment and lay them out gently, the way one lays out evidence bag on a cold metal table. The Vanishing Half. Two identical twins. One small southern town obsessed with skin tone, one daughter who embraces her black identity, and one who erases it. The crime here is subtle: passing, disappearance, the betrayal of shared girlhood. It's a story where the twin bond becomes an echo chamber for questions of race, performance, and reinvention. Stella's life becomes a long form impersonation. Desiree's life becomes an act of endurance. And between them lies a silence loud enough to break inheritance. Bennett is writing a psychological thriller in slow motion. What happens when one twin steals their shared face and begins living a life the other cannot enter? Twin dynamics, yes, but also the shadow, the version of yourself you kill to survive. Then we go to the Wasp Factory. If Bennett's mirror is polished, Banks is fogged with blood and hallucination. Frank lives on a remote Scottish island, constructing rituals, declaring wars on insects, building mythology from bone and wire. But what shapes him most is the absence of his brother Eric, whose breakdown sends tremors through Frank's own already unstable world. This book is a labyrinth: twisted sibling love, the violence of isolation, the horror of a self distorted by lies. When Frank speaks of Eric, it feels like talking about a phantom limb, the sibling who mirrors you by not being there, the shadow that lengthens precisely because you can't see its source. And of course, without spoiling too much, the final reveal rearranges the entire question of mirror and identity. Let's say gender, biology, and the stories we tell children to control them all fold into a crime of imagination. And then we go to the bad seed. Here, Banks gives us a missing brother. Marge gives us an all too present daughter. Rhoda Penmark is immaculate, polite, award winning, the kind of child teachers praise and parents show off, and beneath all that, a cold blooded murderer. But the real story isn't Rhonda's crimes. It's Christine's unraveling as she realizes the mirror her daughter holds up is not one of nurture but of inheritance. The shadow here is genetic memory, nature over nurture, the monster as heirloom. Christine's horror is not "my child did this", but "my child is me", or rather what I might have been. And that is the darkest mirror of all. Let me gather all the threads now that you know what these stories are about, because these novels sit apart in style and setting, but underneath them runs the same subterranean stream, the psychology of mirroring, of shadow, of identity in contrast. Twin dynamics. Twins, literal or metaphorical, teach us something brutal. You do not become yourself alone. You become yourself against someone. Stella and Desiree are a perfect demonstration. Their choices are not individual. They are reactions to each other's existence, like two planets altering each other's orbits. Sibling rivalry. In crime fiction, rivalry rarely stays symbolic. It spills into violence, disappearance, reinvention. Frank and Eric from the Wasp Factory show how rivalry does not always mean competition. Sometimes it means assimilation, obsession, or the desperate need to inherit a narrative that was never meant for you. Then we see the Jungian shadow. And if you have read Jung, I know many of you have, or at least heard his name. The shadow is the buried self that the ego refuses to acknowledge. These novels externalize the shadow through siblings and children. Stella's shadow is her blackness. Frank's shadow is his true identity. Christine's shadow is Rhoda itself. The sibling, the twin, the child. These are not characters. They are mirrors reflecting the repressed parts of the self. Identity formed in contrast. Every one of these protagonists becomes who they are because of a relational pressure. A twin choosing whiteness, a brother collapsing into madness, a daughter revealing inherited cruelty. Identity is not fixed. It is constructed by love, by fear, by secrecy, by blood. And this is where I pause. Only pause, not end, because in the next part of this, I'll break each book further open. Its symbols, its crimes, its psychological riddles. But for now, let's linger on this question like a cold coin. I speak today as though walking through a hall of mirrors, quietly, carefully, letting each reflection shimmer before I touch it. Because when crime fiction brings us siblings, twins, mothers, and daughters, it is never just a biography. It is myth, psychology, shadow work wearing the soft mask of narrative. Who do we become in the mirror of family? I want to lean into these novels with you and explore this question because it's unbearable, because they show that identity is not a solitary act, but a reaction, sometimes a rebellion, sometimes an escape. These books teach us that the family casts the first shadow and the child must learn where to stand inside it. And let me begin where the mirror is clearest and the most fractured. Let me talk about the vanishing half. Twins as competing mirrors. And every time I return to this Brit Bennett's novel, I feel an ache, not of nostalgia, but of distance, of the slow widening gulf between Desiree and Stella Vignes. Twins who begin as one unit, one breath, one identity until the world carves them apart with the blade of colorism. What makes this novel so haunting is that Desiree and Stella are not just sisters, they are two halves of an inheritance. One takes the path of belonging, the other of erasure. One runs towards survival, the other runs towards safety, and both are running from shadows. Desiree's flight from pain. Desiree's story is often mistaken for endurance. She seems the grounded twin, the one who returns to their hometown, who lives visibly, who remains visibly black. But look closely. Desiree doesn't return because she is brave. She returns because she is tired. She is fleeing a violent marriage, seeking refuge in the only geography that knows her name. Her flight is a quiet one, away from a man who bruised her, away from the life that hollowed her, away from the fear of becoming invisible. Desiree runs towards herself not because she knows what she wants, but because she knows what she cannot bear anymore. We come to Stella, whose flight is into whiteness. But Stella's flight is colder, more precise, the cutting of a cord, the abandoning of a twin, the annihilation of her former self. Passing is not merely racial impersonation. In this novel, it is a crime against the twin bond. Stella does not become white, she becomes fiction. She lives inside a lie constructed so tightly that even her own daughter doesn't know her truth. And what she is running from is not whiteness or blackness. It is the mirror of Desiree. Desiree is the reminder of who Stella used to be, the evidence of the life she abandoned. To maintain her illusion, Stella must avoid every reflective surface, including her sister. There is an identity formed against the twin. The tragedy of these twins is that they define themselves against each other. Desiree shapes her existence around the wound of Stella leaving. Stella shapes her existence around the fear of Desiree returning. Twinship should create symmetry. Here it creates tension, distortion, a cracked mirror that cuts both ways. The psychological insight is sharp. You are never more yourself than in opposition to your twin. Where one bends, the other breaks. Where one hides, the other endures. And between them lies the deepest crime, the crime of becoming two strangers who still share a face. Then we come to the Wasp Factory, the brother who is a ghost. If the vanishing half is a split mirror, then the Wasp Factory is a mirror covered in ritual markings, obscured, violent, and terrifying. What makes this novel unforgettable is the presence of a sibling who is mostly absent. Eric, the brother, haunts the narrative the way a ghost haunts an old estate, whispering, trembling, burning around the edges. And Frank, our narrator, our unreliable guide, builds his identity in opposition to this phantom. Eric is alive, but he functions like a dead twin. He is the shadow that Frank cannot escape. Eric's breakdown, his madness, his flaming vision of the world, these become the coordinates Frank uses to define himself. Frank's rituals, his violence, his constructed cosmology all arise from this one need. I am not Eric. I must not be Eric. But the tragedy is that Frank doesn't realize how much Eric's absence controls him. Silence can be a powerful sculptor. Frank's identity built on not being Eric. Everything Frank does, every kill, every myth he invents, every object he enshrines in the factory is a way of distancing himself from the brother he fears becoming. Frank thinks he is asserting control, but he is being controlled by the shadow he is trying to outrun. This is where Jung's theory of the shadow appears in this most feral form. What you repress becomes your ruler. Frank represses everything: gender, emotion, vulnerability, and the novel shows us the cost of such repression. The more he insists on being not Eric, the more he spirals into the same violence, the same instability, becoming exactly like him. And then comes the twist, so devastating, so reshaping, that I will say this: Frank's entire identity was built on a lie. He's neither who he believes he is nor who his father made him. And the horror is not just the truth of his body, but the truth of his reflection. He thought he was escaping his brother's shadow. He was, in fact, becoming it. If in Bennett's world the twin bond breaks, in Banks' world the sibling bond mutates until the shadow consumes the self. Then we come to the bad seed, where the mother is the failed mirror. Here the mirror shifts. It's no longer horizontal, sibling to sibling, but vertical, mother to daughter. And this might be the most chilling mirror of all, because where twins mirror possibility, parent child mirrors destiny. Christine mirrors Rhoda only in fear. Christine Penmark looks at her daughter Rhoda and sees nothing of herself, nothing of her warmth, her empathy, her human softness. Instead, she sees a child whose politeness is a performance, whose charm is weaponized, whose innocence is counterfeit. But the deeper horror is that Christine begins to see what Rhoda truly mirrors: not her, but her family's past. Christine is a mirror that cannot reflect. She cannot teach conscience to a child who was born without the organ. She becomes a witness instead of a guide, a terrified observer of her own bloodline. Rhoda as a monstrous reflection of the past, not as a blank slate. She is a continuation, a legacy, a hereditary echo of the family's darkest history. In crime fiction, this is the ultimate dread: that violence is not taught but inherited, that morality is not shaped but predetermined. Rhoda is the shadow Christine never knew she had. The daughter doesn't learn violence, she repeats it. Which brings us to this key psychological point. The shadow is hereditary, the shadow as legacy. Here, the mirror becomes a genealogy, the crime is ancestral. The child is merely the latest chapter. Christine horror is not just my daughter killed, it is my daughter is the proof that I was born from darkness and that I may pass that darkness on. And in this book, motherhood becomes an act of looking into a mirror that not only reflects you, but the entire lineage behind you. There is no place to hide. And then as I move forward, I want to leave you with a question that sits like a stone at the center of all three novels. Try to think about it. Try to answer it in the comments. The family casts the first shadow. The child must learn where to stand inside it. Some children, like Desiree, stand in the light. Some, like Stella, flee into another person's shadow. Some, like Frank, crawl inside the dark and call it home. And some, like Rhoda, are the shadow. I want you to think about and try to answer how crime fiction uses family not just as context but as prophecy. But for now, let us linger here, like a door you're not sure you want to walk through yet. A darker corridor of this conversation, a place where every footstep echoes, where the mirrors are taller, where their reflections lean a little too close. Where I ask you the question the crime fiction knows better than any other genre. What happens when you spend your whole life running from the version of yourself you never choose to be? And each of our three novels offers a different answer. Twins who fracture, siblings who repel, mothers and daughters who inherit each other's nightmares. And I want to walk slowly through these reflections, the way one wanders through an abandoned funhouse, half afraid to see their own face staring back. Whenever I think about the vanishing half, I don't begin with Stella's passing or Desiree's return or even the daughters who inherit their mother's decision. I begin with the moment Stella chooses whiteness and what that choice does to Desiree. Because in twin narratives, choice is never private, it is destiny. When a twin chooses a path, the other one feels abandoned, not just by family, but by an alternate self. Desiree doesn't lose her sister that day. She loses an entire possible future she thought was guaranteed. Twins are raised, especially in fiction, as if they are two chambers of one heart. A life shared, a fate doubled, a mirror that breathes. So when Stella steps into a new life, Desiree experiences it as a psychic amputation. It's not just my sister left me, it is the version of myself I might have been walked away without me. Crime fiction loves this ache. The knowledge that the wound we cannot heal is the one inflicted by someone who shares our face. And the dread is not merely the separation itself, but the question it forces. If she becomes someone else, what does that make me? Stella's transformation destabilizes Desiree's identity. Desiree becomes the twin who remains, the half that did not vanish, the twin defined by absence. And in this sense, The Vanishing Half becomes a novel not about race alone, but about the terror of watching the other version of you succeed, survive, escape. Twinship here is destiny, but a destiny that splits, creating two futures that can no longer recognize each other. And if The Vanishing Half gives us destiny split, the Wasp Factory gives us identity sharpened like a knife against a sibling shaped whetstone. Frank Calderham is one of the most disturbing narrators in modern fiction, not merely because of his violence, but because of the reason for it. Everything Frank does is a performance, a declaration, a ritual scream into the marsh wind I am not him, not Eric, not the broken brother, not the burning mind, not the nightmare the family whispers about. Frank builds his entire selfhood from the factory to the kills to the myths he constructs around the need to differentiate himself from Eric. Frank's rituals, inventions, cruelty all perform to say, I am not him. But here is where the dread grows teeth. Crime fiction understands the psychological trap better than any other genre. Identity built against something always ends up orbiting the very thing it fears. Frank defines himself by resistance. But resistance is not liberation, it's bondage. This is where Jung steps into the room. Quiet, spectral, devastating. What you resist persists. Frank resists everything: emotion, truth, vulnerability, and most importantly, the sibling shadow of Eric. And of course, Eric becomes the gravitational center of Frank's life. Of course, Frank's violence echoes Eric's breakdown. Of course, Frank's identity cracks along the same lines. The tragedy is that Frank cannot see that in trying not to become Eric, he becomes a distorted reflection of him. Crime fiction teaches us that obsession is just devotion wearing a mask and fear is a form of imitation. Frank is trapped in the mirror he built, and the worst part is that he thinks he built it to keep himself safe. And then we go to inherited evil, the bad seed. If the first book gives us destiny and the second gives us resistance, the bad seed gives us inheritance. Here, the mirror is no longer between siblings, but between mother and daughter. And it is the most painful mirror of all because it asks a question no parent wants to face. What if my parent, what, sorry, what if my child is not a reflection of my love but a reflection of my shadow? Christine Penmark spends much of the novel trying to understand her own daughter Rhoda, the immaculate manners, the perfect plates, the eerie calm, the absence of remorse. Rhoda plays the role of the perfect child flawlessly. But that mask is not innocence, it is camouflage. Rhoda's perfect child mask is the shadow's costume. Every polite smile, every courtesy, every practiced expression, all of it is a veneer covering the truth, and Christian is the only one who feels the fracture beneath it. She realizes this isn't my daughter, this is my shadow, not a literal one, but a psychological one. Rhoda becomes the unspoken, unacknowledged darkness of the family line, violence that skipped a generation and now stands in the kitchen asking for a glass of milk. If the vanishing half explores the shadow we run from, and the Wasp Factory explores the shadow we resist, the bad seed explores the shadow that hunts us down. In this world, the unchosen self is hereditary. The child becomes the vessel for ancestral dread. The crimes of the past are reborn in a pinafore. And Christine carries the guilt not of a mother who raised a monster, but of a woman who realizes the monster was waiting in the bloodline all along. Crime fiction rarely offers comfort, but this book offers none. Only a mirror Christine wishes she could shatter without shattering her child. Imagine a hall of mirrors, but not the carnival kind, something colder, older. A corridor where the mirrors are tall and thin, some cracked, some warped, some reflecting you before you even step into view. In this hall, Stella from the Vanishing Half runs from the reflection she shares with Desiree. Frank from the Wasp Factory pounds his fist against the glass trying to break the image of Eric. Christine from the Bad Seed sees Rhoda's face where her own should be and wants to turn away but cannot. Each character is haunted not by what they are, but by the version of themselves they refuse to face. A hall of mirrors where each character runs from the one reflection they cannot break, and the dread that follows them is not supernatural, not criminal in the traditional sense, but deeply, devastatingly psychological. The fear of the unchosen self, the twin you didn't become, the sibling you didn't want to reassemble, the child who mirrors the part of you you'd rather forget. I'll pause here, not end, because this entire series is an unfolding, a slow turn deeper into the shadows cast by family. In the next part of the discussion of these three books, we'll step into the mechanics of psychological dread, how crime fiction uses family to build inevitability, how identity becomes prophecy, and how the unchosen self shapes every crime that follows. For now, sit with this. The mirror is never the enemy. It is the truth we have spent our whole lives avoiding. I want to move now to the marrow of this conversation, the place where psychology and narrative finally fuse, where crime fiction stops being about bodies and becomes about shadows. Because every crime story, no matter how many knives, lies, or locked rooms you place in it, begins long before the crime. It begins in childhood, in family, in mirrors we didn't choose. And it makes one thing how shadow is created. I want to break this question down in a way forensic psychologist might break down a confession, quietly, precisely, following the seams until the truth reveals itself. Let's talk about the Jungian shadow, the disowned self. Carl Jung believed that the shadow is everything we refuse to admit belongs to us: anger, desire, violence, ambition, grief. But in families, the shadow becomes more than personal, it becomes inherited. Every child learns early which part of themselves are safe to reveal and which parts must be hidden to survive. Some hide their brilliance, some hide their softness, some hide their rage, but the hidden parts don't disappear. They condense, they darken, they become the gravitational center of personality. And then crime fiction enters the room as the only genre brave enough to ask, what happens when that shadow is given shape, given voice, given a face that looks like yours? Then we talk about mirroring. Children become the way they are seen. Psychologists call it mirroring, but crime writers have always known the truth instinctively. A child becomes whatever reflection the family holds up to them. If a child is seen as fragile, they become fearful. If seen as wicked, they become cunning. If seen as responsible, they break under the weight of being the good one. In each of our novels, the mirror is distorted. Desiree sees herself through the mirror of abandonment and becomes the twin who endures. Frank sees himself through the mirror of secrecy and becomes the monster he thinks he must be. Rhoda sees herself through the mirror of perfection and becomes the wolf dressed as Sunday innocence. Mirroring does not create identity, it confines it. Every family writes a script long before a child can speak. Some are cast as caretakers, some are rebels, some are ghosts, some as golden children. These rules, these roles are not optional. Breaking the script feels like breaking love. In The Vanishing Half, the script for light skinned daughters is simple: become palatable to the world. In The Wasp Factory, the script is brutally disguised as tradition: a father hiding truth behind rituals, a child absorbing violence as language. In The Bad Seed, the script is performance: smile, curtsy, charm, even when darkness is humming beneath the skin. None of these children is allowed to be their unfiltered self, so they become something else, whatever the script makes room for. And in crime fiction, those tight roles become traps. Most people misunderstand sibling rivalry. It isn't about toys or grades or parental attention, it's about identity. Who am I if you exist? Sibling rivalry isn't about affection, it is about survival. A fight over who gets to define the narrative. If you place all these novels side by side, a pattern emerges. Each protagonist is shaped not by what their family gives them, but what their families deny them. Identity grows in negative space. Stella becomes the woman she wasn't allowed to be. Frank becomes the monster his father's secrets demanded. Rhoda becomes the darkness her lineage predicted. The shadow is born not from who they are, but from who they are forbidden to be. And that is why crime fiction returns to family again and again, because every murder, every cruelty, every disappearance begins in the gaps left by the people closest to us. Three stories, three shadows, one question. All three novels, for all their differences, race, passing, Scottish rituals, maternal dread, circle the same gravitational point. Identity is not formed in isolation. Identity is forged in contrast, collision, reflection. We become who we are in relation to the people who know us first, and wound us first, and mirror us first, and haunt us the longest. Family is the original crime scene. Siblinghood is the original rivalry. Childhood, the original alibi. And every protagonist we have walked beside tonight is caught in that ancient psychological machinery, the impossible task of becoming one's own self while standing in the long shadow of another. So let me ask again, and I want you to feel the weight of it now, after everything we have unfolded. Do we become ourselves by standing with our siblings or by standing apart from them? Is identity a shared inheritance, a rebellion, a fracture, a mirror we polish together or a mirror we break alone? Crime fiction refuses a single answer, which means, in a way, the question is the point. I want to leave the doorway open because this conversation is not finished, not even close. In the next episode, part 2 of this discussion, we will go deeper, much deeper into the places where the mirror doesn't just reflects but distorts, where the shadow doesn't just follow but returns. We are going to look at how the shadows refuses to stay buried in children, in memories, in bodies, how twins collapse when the distance between them tightens. Not reconciliation, but an implosion. How mirrors eventually break and why the breaking is the moment of truth. For every character in these novels, we will talk about the aftermath, the fallout, the return of what was repressed, and the way crime fiction builds inevitability through family, secrecy, lineage. The story deepens, the reflections twist, the shadows grow longer. For now, sit with the final question of this episode. Is identity something we walk toward together or something we carve alone from the dark? With this question, I will see you in part 2, where we follow the shadow back to its source. This has been the Criminal Imagination. Thank you for listening. Until next time.